Hi everyone and welcome to the Let's Talk HR show with myself, Jack Nolan, and my special guest today, Dan Costello. So Dan, what does HR mean to you?
Hi, Jack. Thanks for having me on. So for me, in a nutshell, HR is all about how you enable your workforce, right, to deliver the best outcomes for the business. And that's a pretty simple summary, but there are two sides to the coin, if you like. So there's the sort of individual side to the coin. So how do you enable individual employees within the workforce so that they can perform at their best? And that touches on all sorts of different aspects of the employee life cycle. So how do you bring people in? How do you onboard people? How do you train them? How do you manage their careers? How do you pay them? How do you create a culture and an environment where they can thrive? How do you ensure they're well managed and feel cared about? How do you offboard people? So, all of that sort of employee-centric type stuff, which hopefully drives up engagement and then ultimately performance. But then there's the other side, which I think isn't always obvious from the outside, which is the more organizational side. So how do you enable that workforce as a whole? So you start to get into things like organizational design, organizational health. Are we set up in the most efficient way? What do our sort of talent processes look like in our succession planning? So are we resilient to attrition? Have we got enough bench strength? What do our policies and processes look like? And what kind of employee experience do those policies and processes give to the people who work for us? And all of that sort of stuff. So you can see that from that quite simple sentence that I started with, you very quickly and very easily expand into a whole multitude of different things that tend to come under the banner of HR. And I think the key for HR leaders and HR organizations is making sure that all of those different strands of activity sort of come together in a coherent way, and that they reinforce each other, and they help to drive the best outcomes for the business and don't sort of work against each other or work against the outcome, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and it's really brilliant to hear. It's like a fresh perspective, really, because I've spoke to quite a few HR people, and what it means to them is completely different to what it means to you. You know what I mean? It's good to have your philosophy there behind what you're actually saying and what it means to you. So it's really powerful stuff you just shared. So what inspired and influenced you to work within HR?
So I think I've always had a sort of interest in people and people issues, if you like. And I studied psychology at A-level. So I would have been 16 then when you start your A-levels. And I got really interested in human behavior and sort of human interaction. And I carried that study on to university, and so psychology was what I studied. And in the final year, there was an occupational psychology module, and that was the first time that I'd studied that sort of workforce or workplace type psychology, not technology. And something just clicked. It really spoke to me. That was the first time that had happened throughout university, where I enjoyed what I studied, but something came alive in the occupational module, and I had this sort of really clear line of sight from the things that we were learning about and studying to not just how this might be applied in the real world, but almost how this can provide a financial bottom line impact for real businesses and real companies. And that was really exciting. So I thought, well, HR is the real world version of this, if you like. And it snowballed from there, really. So I wrote to a few companies locally to try and find an internship. And I was really lucky. I got taken on by a local NHS trust. So I got a good insight into sort of entry of HR, if you like. And then when I graduated, I got onto the HR graduate program with Shell, which was brilliant. I had a fantastic 9 years at Shell, lots of different roles, lots of different types of business, fantastic learnings. And then about a year ago, I joined Fujitsu in the business partnering team. And I've just moved into a new role just last week as the head of HR policy and projects. So, very exciting.
That's an amazing journey you've been on, and from a young age having that go-getter mentality to go out and write them letters, because obviously if you didn't write them letters, you wouldn't have started your journey and be where you are today, even though it's just a small thing. All adds up, you know what I mean? And that's what I like to encourage people listening to be able to say, if you want something, don't be afraid to take the risk in writing them letters or sending them emails or making that phone call to try and better yourself. And especially if you're involved in HR, it's all about people. And so if the more you understand people and the way people tick, I believe it can help you so much further advance within your career as a HR professional.
And I think, well, I agree. And I think on that point, don't be afraid to take the risk, but don't be too disheartened by, failure in inverted commas. So I probably wrote to something like 80 companies and only one got back to me.
That's amazing.
But that one launched my career. So there you go, right? And then it's the same when you, I do a lot of work outside of work with students who are applying for graduate programs as a sort of coach or a mentor. And it's always a numbers game. You can apply to dozens of particularly graduate programs, and because they're so competitive, it's not even always anything that you've done wrong as such. You just, it's the order in which you move through the funnel with other candidates. So, like we say, take the risk, but keep going. And when things don't work out, keep trying. Don't be too disheartened by it.
Absolutely. Like every no is a new opportunity. That's what it stands for in my eyes. New opportunity.
I like that.
You take that back to the team with you.
I will.
But yeah. So thank you for sharing that perspective and that mindset. That's really powerful stuff. So again, why did, I know you mentioned your organisation, but why did you choose to work in your current organisation? I know you've shared a little bit of that journey, but is there a why behind it?
Yeah, so I've been business partnering with the IT function at Shell from 2016. And then, I don't know what it's like now, it's probably the same, but I don't know. But then it was very much like an in-house consultancy. So it did a lot of its own development, own architecture. It had a lot of in-house capability, which isn't always the case for sort of internal IT functions. So I got a really good insight into almost what it was like to work in a technology company. And I was just hugely excited by the potential for technology in solving sort of business problems and adding real business value. So one example at Shell, we started to use algorithms and machine learning for what we call predictive maintenance. So these algorithms could tell us, what might need fixing before it broke, or what might need to be sort of adjusted or checked on before something went wrong, based on all of the data that you put into the system. So obviously we were then able to keep our facilities in better shape, which meant that you have increased uptime, and if they're operating for longer, you're producing more, you're making more money, and it's also safer because things aren't breaking, things aren't going wrong. So just things like that, the potential, to deploy technology and drive real outcomes was super exciting. So I thought that I'd maybe quite like to take my career in that direction towards the technology sector. And I started to have a few conversations with sort of different technology companies. And then I saw the opportunity at Fujitsu, and obviously it's a world leader, right? It's a major player in the technology sector. So I was instantly drawn to the brand. And then the more I spoke to Fujitsu, the various recruiters and managers throughout that process, the more that I thought it would be a really good fit for me in terms of company culture and the way of working and so on. And what's great is that's been true. So of a year, just over a year of lived experience, it has been a great fit, particularly in the pandemic. So I've worked for Fujitsu for going on 14 months, and I've never met anybody. I've never been to an office, and yet I feel very much part of the organization and part of the team. So I've been really proud actually of the way that Fujitsu's dealt with the pandemic. So in terms of helping our own employees to navigate it, onboarding employees like myself, successfully, but also then taking some of the learnings from the pandemic, particularly around things like increased options for flexible working, and helping to keep those up going forward, because there are things, which the pandemic's been very difficult for everybody, but there are things that have come from it that we can take as positives, right? And we're going to come on in a bit, I think, and talk about some mental health. That's another one, but we should make sure that those positives and things that we've learned, carry on as we emerge from the pandemic and get back into something like normality. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is how we're emerging as a leader in that flexible working space, and not just through our own practices, but also thinking about how we shape our product offerings to clients to help enable that in other companies. And we're focusing very much on the technological solutions that allow more flexibility, but also thinking about the culture around it. So it isn't just about, go implement a technology, off you go. Actually, what behaviors and what cultures do you need around that to really get the most value out of it? And I think that's an incredibly exciting place for us to be playing in.
Thank you for sharing that wisdom with us. My mind just got like that. Wow. It's amazing. Honestly, like, it's such a great perspective to share and wisdom that you're dropping. I love it. I'm sure my audience listening will get a lot from what you just said there, honestly. So how important is mental health and emotional well-being in the workforce?
Hugely important is the quick answer. And it comes back to what I was saying earlier, right? About how do we make sure that employees feel cared about, and also creating that environment where they can perform at the best. And I guess that then goes for all elements of well-being. You need to have a high degree of well-being to be firing on all cylinders, if you like. But I think the mental well-being side probably hasn't had enough attention historically. I think we'd all, there's general consensus about that. And that's been changing for some time now. So certainly for as long as I've been in the workplace, 10 years, mental health and mental well-being have been something that have been talked about. I think, prior to that, there were times when it was never talked about. But I still don't think it had gone far enough, right? And you had lots of a varied sort of pace of change across different companies and different industries. So lots of people at very different places. And almost that in of itself illustrates an issue, because you don't have that around physical well-being. That people aren't at a different stage when you talk about physical well-being. There's a common understanding of what it is and how you sort of interact with it. So I think the pandemic, this is one of the other positives, right, has really accelerated that conversation and the focus. It's brought it very much into focus, I think. So not only in terms of more people being willing to talk about it, more people sort of understanding it. But I think it's brought much more of a sort of workplace focus. So there's some research by a company called Second Sight from last year, and they found that 51% of employees want an employer-led mental health support framework. So now just over half the workforce is almost that pull and that expectation from an employer to provide something in that space. And I think the more that happens, the more it will become even more the norm. And I think that's very powerful in terms of driving that agenda forward. So I think it's hugely important. And I think we're just about now getting to a place where it will be given the importance that it should be.
Absolutely. Like, I've noticed that a lot of companies are starting to, through having conversations with people in the HR space and some talks that I've done recently, people are starting to become more in tune with how important it is. Like you said, it's hugely important. And without it, it's like, if the health of the organization isn't there, then how can you develop the business? Yeah. How can you move forward towards them goals on a high level if everything's functioning up here? You know what I mean? You don't want people to burn out. You don't want people to be got off for being unwell. You don't want people to do silly things and do, let's just say how it is, take their own lives because of stress at work and the personal.
In the extreme example.
Yeah, the extreme example, but it's still there. You know what I mean? Something that we should need to highlight. And through the work that I do, I'm there to help people become aware of it and to prevent themselves from getting into situations where I've been sectioned on 2 occasions. Suffering with bipolar. But I wanted to be able to show that, as a leading example through myself and people who I speak to like yourself, and that it's okay not to be okay, and that we can still turn our adversities into advantages and become the best versions of ourselves. So mental health is massive, within the workforce, and we shouldn't neglect it. And again, which moves nicely onto my next question is, what strategies have you found beneficial to support people with their mental health and employee well-being development?
So we've got a really well thought through approach, I think, at Fujitsu. And I think there are little examples of things that could probably be adopted in lots of places. There's a general sort of ethos that I really like about embedding well-being into the everyday. So making good practices around well-being something that we just do normally. We don't talk about it necessarily as well-being, but actually embedding that into just the normal way of working the business as usual. The 2 really small examples to share. One of them is what we call the work your way hour. So we said to employees, right, there's an hour a week, put it in your diary. There's a specific budget code to write the time to, you know, if you're a consultant and you need the timeline. And that's your hour to do whatever you want with. There's only one rule, and that whatever you do can't be work. So go off and do what you want. And whether that's, you know, people will go for a run, people might just sit and read a book, you know, go out into the garden, watch TV, whatever you want. And we also ask people to share it internally on Yammer, which is our sort of internal social media. So we got lots of engagement around that. We found teams started to do things like go for a virtual walk, where everyone would go for a walk in their own neighborhood, and they'd maybe, you know, call each other on the WhatsApp or Teams or whatever. So it worked really well. And the reason that you have the sort of, you know, book an hour in your diary and here's a sort of budget code for it, and that sort of, for me initially felt very sort of, you know, like corporate. But what it did was legitimize that taking a break. It took away all the administrative headaches for managers and leaders and so on. And so that's what made it really powerful. And it's worked really well. We've had great feedback from employees and great feedback from managers about how well it's worked. And the second thing, which is actually new, but I really like it, is we're shortening the default meeting time. So when you go into Outlook, we use Outlook, you set up a meeting with someone, it defaults to half an hour. The slots are half an hour. So we've changed that so the default slots are 25 minutes, so that there's a natural break in between meetings. And it's just a very small thing. It's a very small sort of nudge, if you like. And I've no doubt that people will cover just as much content in 25 minutes as they would have in 30. But that break will naturally be in there, so you're not suffering as much from this sort of, you know, video call fatigue where you're just bouncing from one to another.
Yeah.
So I think there are really small things that you can do. And then obviously in addition, there are the bigger things that you need to do. So the more structural things around making sure that line managers are well equipped to support the teams from a well-being perspective, as well as the day job, if you like. Obviously, we want to create an open culture around mental health. So that people feel free to talk about it, people want to talk about it. And the more you can encourage leaders and colleagues to come out and share their own experiences, share their own stories, that's really powerful. You know, as you just did a second ago in this conversation, you know, it helps to really personalize it, and, you know, goes a long way to normalizing it, right, and making it something that people feel comfortable to talk about. And then there's the sort of the sort of formal provision side of it, which I think is important. So we have a team of mental health first aiders, for example. We have an employee assistance program through which employees can access services like counselling. So I think, you know, having those there and it being clear around the channels for support for employees is important as well. But I think the things that are the most powerful in terms of impact are some of those bigger cultural things around, you know, how do we do this every day in our jobs?
That's brilliant, Dan. Honestly, it's fantastic. And it's very smart what you're doing as a company. Even like you said, them little small breaks between meetings, just give you a second to get your thoughts together, you know, massive.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're letting people be comfortable with sharing their experiences. Like I've just started like a new idea, what I've just been booked to do on at the end of the month. It's called vulnerability circles. Sorry about that. The phone just went off. See, real life. So I've started this thing called vulnerability circles, and, you know, just spreading positive gossip about our employees and people that are in the workforce. You know, instead of spreading rumors about each other in a negative, toxic way, spread how great someone's doing. So when it gets back to them, they feel valued in the workforce. They'll feel like, oh, actually, you know, Dave just said that my work was great. He wanted to see how great it was himself because he's had a chat with John, and then, you know, it just makes that positive culture and development, you know, in my opinion. And that vulnerability circle of being able to get leaders to share their, you know, their thoughts, their feelings in the personal life, in the, you know, in professional life, what's stressing them out, and letting leaders do it first, so it makes it that moral authority and comfort to be able to ease around other employees and managers within that circle, so that everyone will go, actually, we are human, we are here together, we're all on the same mission, and we've all had good days and bad days, but, you know, at least people that, say, for example, John had a bad night last night, he had an argument with his missus, and his kid was up all night because he was unwell with whatever, and now he's had a knock-on effect, and he's been a bit fussy this week and a bit, you know, not behaving different, but he's been a bit stressed out, and he's had a fallback on all of us. Now we understand where that's come from. Now we know how to support John and David, and how to support Bill and Ben, the flower pot men, sort of thing. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
you know,
and that's it, isn't it? If you understand, you can do what you need to support, as opposed to letting it be a problem. You can work on it together.
So I'm on to the last question with you now, Dan. I'm a bit gutted it's come to an end because I've enjoyed this chat with yourself. I could chat to you.
Yeah, me too.
And so it is. In your experience, what have you found creates great leadership in your teams?
So it's a great question. And I'm no expert on leadership, but it's, there are endless books, right, and articles and debates and videos and stuff on leadership. So there's a lot of stuff out there. But I can only speak from my own experience. So I've worked for and with some amazing leaders, and I've worked for and with some less good leaders. And I think you can always learn from everything, right? So there are things that you learn that God, that's brilliant. I want to adopt that into my own leadership style, and things that you see and experience that you sort of think that you might choose not to adopt into your own leadership style. But I think that there are a couple of things for me that are key. So, and there's almost a skill to leaders of doing things at an organizational level and an individual level. So for me, it's about firstly setting out a vision. So what are we trying to do? What are we aiming for? Where are we heading? And as I say, that's at an organizational level. So, what is our company here to do? What is this bit of the business here to do? What, as a team, what are we aiming for? What's our direction of travel? What are we trying to achieve? But then bringing that down to the individual level, say, how does your work contribute to that? So, helping people to understand the link between what they're doing every day and the company's direction. What's their contribution? And then the next thing is again on those two levels, but the feedback piece, right? So how are we doing as an organization? Where are we in the journey? How far have we come? What went well? What did we learn? What's next? Where are we going? And then again, the individual feedback. So what are you doing well? How are you progressing against the goals that we agreed? Again, what went well? What can you learn? What's next? And what's that contribution to the wider picture? And I think if you can help people to understand that's really powerful in terms of helping people to be engaged and perform at the best. And I think the thing that sort of goes around it all, and it's hugely important, is the issue of care. Like people want to feel cared about, and for me, that's a really important role of a leader and of a manager. And I think sometimes there's a perception that it's the HR function that is responsible for care, and I very passionately disagree with that. I think the HR function is the owner, perhaps, of the culture, and so if companies want to think about a caring culture, then maybe it is the HR function that facilitates that maybe tries to embed that. But the day-to-day aspect of care, for me, sits very firmly with the line manager. And I don't believe for a second that there's anybody in any workplace who isn't cared for by their manager, but is happy about the fact that the HR function somewhere cares about them. Yeah. So it's got to be a manager thing. And I think if employees feel cared for, that's hugely important in terms of engagement.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more, because I'll share a quick story with you before it comes to the end and wrap up, so anyone who's listening can get something from it. My dad works at BMW, so when I got unwell with my mental health, and I was sectioned on 2 occasions, and I took a couple of months out, and it affected not just me but my family, so the ripple effect happened. My dad had to come out of work, mum had to come out of work to support me and get me back on track and get well. But what BMW did for my dad was they supported him financially, so we could keep paying the bills, keep paying the mortgage, and keep putting food on the table. And without that support, we would have been massively affected as a family. And it would have all been my fault, because it was my fault who got unwell. You know what I mean? But, if it wasn't for that BMW being supportive of my dad and feeding us all as a family, basically, and keeping us all going, that financial support, it's made my dad 10 times more loyal to the company. It's made him driven to the company, made him give more passion to the company, made him outperform everyone in the company to be the best salesman and over-deliver his service to his customers 110%, because of everything BMW has done for them, for him, and us as a family. So it's a two-way streak, I believe. It's like not only what can employees do for a business, but what can the business do for the employees, especially those who are determined to win and succeed in the company. So that's what I know is to be true, because of it's lived experience.
Lived experience, there you go.
In your words now. Yeah, man. Well, thank you so much. And it's come to the end now of the podcast, guys. But I hope you took something away from it. I hope you got some value from Dan's wisdom and my little stories that we've shared. And I'll see you in another episode soon. Bye for now.